Hello and welcome. It is with great pleasure that I present to you two people that need absolutely no introduction in our industry. Joining us from Massachusetts, principal at CDA, Consultant Design, Communication Design Associates, Michael Goldman. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Michael, prior to joining CDA, you spent, just about 14 years with Crestron, ending up as an executive director for enterprise strategies and development. And prior to that, it was when you and I met first. You were VP of sales at Crimson Tech in Wilmington, Massachusetts. Quite a resume. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And from across the country, just outside of San Francisco, Josh Srago. Welcome. Josh is a JD candidate and law clerk at Santa Clara University, founder of Sound Reason, tech policy writer and speaker, formerly editor-at-large at AV Nation Media. What a conversation we are going to have, guys.
Yeah,
welcome,
thanks for
Josh.
having me. Thank you. I appreciate it. It's hearing that read to me is kind of odd at this point because it's like, oh, right. I've done those things too. I forgot about that.
Wait, but there is more. Didn't you manage AV engineering at the integration firm as well?
Yeah, I mean, in my career, I ran a corporate facility. I worked for a manufacturer. I did engineering for a contractor, and I worked as a consultant. So I've sort of been all over the place.
And that's fantastic because this is exactly what we need to tackle an interesting topic. So we are going to talk about mistakes to avoid when designing post-COVID-19 meeting spaces. And before we jump right to it, let me preface, this is an uncharted territory. I mean, nobody knows what question to even ask. And I hope that people who are listening to us today or will listen to us after today, at least learn what to look out for and what to consider when they are building or creating their plan. And what I would like to touch today on is 4 separate kind of discipline. Let's talk about policies. Let's talk about people and the employee experience. Let's talk about building and maybe building security. And at the end, let's see how technology figures to all of it. So let's get started. Josh, I'll throw it right to you. Do we need new policies in the new world?
Yes, we do. We very much do. This is, as you said, this is uncharted waters. We don't really have any contingency plans for these. We've never faced anything like this. So when you're starting to look at trying and relating this back to designing new technology systems, because that is the goal. The end game of this is how are we going to integrate and how are we going to play with technology and how does technology fit into this? But you have to start with what is the new company policy? Are you going to be simplistic and put tape on the floor? Are you going to remove chairs from offices? What policies are you going to implement for your employees in terms of how they're going to come back to work? Are you only going to allow for a 40% capacity, a 50% capacity, 20% capacity? How many people are you going to allow in the office? What is your policy and procedure for how do you structure that scheduling? How do you talk about a meeting room being in use or not in use or needing to be cleaned? And starting to put these things in place of you really have to go back and reconsider what you're doing, how you've always used your space and say, can we keep doing this? If not, how does this have to change? If it has to change, what do we have to address and how do we have to inform a new policy and provide that information to the employees as to how they're going to interact with these new spaces?
That's interesting. Is it human resources and facilities people becoming the most important people in a corporation? What do you think, Michael?
Well, I think they're going to become, they've always been important, but I think they're going to be even more so. Especially HR. I mean, years ago, there was a big focus in the real estate and facilities side of the house, and that's who AV professionals would work with. And at some point there was a shift and everybody started focusing on the IT department. at the end of the day, the IT department are really solving business challenges with technology. And the new challenge or the new wrinkle here is that companies have operated a certain way, and now there's been a pause. And in order to pick up business and restart business again and go back to the office, we need to rethink, can we follow the same rules like Josh said or not? And the people that set those rules are typically going to come from the HR side, right? Because not only do they have to set the rules, but then we need to come up with a way to manage and enforce the rules and figure out what to do if the rules don't work. And then the other piece that's really interesting to this is whether it's the sales leaders or the marketing leaders or even the CEO of the company, somehow you have to determine the company has a mission. In order to do it safely, we need these new policies and procedures. How does that impact upon the mission and the ability for people to get work done? You can also go even wider and more granular and say to yourself, well, we're going to cut capacity. Sure. We're going to see people in every other seat. Great. What happens when people walk in the front door? What else are you going to request and require of them? I've seen companies talking about things like, we're going to do temperature checks. I've seen companies talk about doing things like, we're going to make you sign waivers and forms, right? And as soon as people start talking about those types of things, alarm bells go off.
Big
right?
time. Because
and sorry, one last point, and then you have to also fold into that, at what point of friction that gets added back into people say, I would rather just work remote, right? So I think there's this swirl of things that need to be considered, and technology will play a role in the solution, right? But first, I think you have to start with, how are we going to go back to work? And how are we going to accomplish what it is we need to accomplish? What are the policies around it? What are the changes that our people are going to have to endure? And what gaps does that create?
that's right.
Right? Because the gap is the thing we're going to need to fill. And some people hope that, something as simple as tape or something as complex as digital signage will fill that gap. But I think it's really important to understand all the vulnerabilities and all the changes just to people and how they're going to go about doing their job before we can get down to, hey, we need to have these touchless rooms with wireless presentation, which I'm sure we do, but are we even going to have people in the building, right? There's kind of greater, higher priorities, I think, as it relates to workflow and how people get their jobs done.
So am I kind of hearing that the business owners, will have to reach out to legal minds and rewrite employment agreement based on the fact that some people may be sitting in a seat in the office and some people may be working from home? Do they fall under the same rules and regulations?
You will have to consult with attorneys. Attorneys will be involved in this process, but a lot of this will come down to how they choose to engage. And like a perfect example of this that goes to your point is Facebook. Facebook made the announcement that if everybody started saying, oh well, if I'm only working remotely and there's a permanent remote working instance set up, then I'm going to leave the Bay Area because the San Francisco Bay Area is one of the most expensive real estate markets in the country. And I'm going to take my giant Bay Area salary and I'm going to go live someplace where it's more affordable. Well, Facebook then came out and said, if you move, your salary will be commensurate with where you live. Okay. And so they were actually, basically it was effectively a threat that you won't just get to take the cost of living increase that comes with living in the Bay Area with you. And so companies are going to have to make decisions about things like that. Of if you can work remotely, does that mean that salaries have to be reevaluated in terms of how they're being handled? Does that mean that and as you were suggesting, does that mean that your policies for work from home? So is the expectation then work as you please? Is the expectation work in a way that best suits for you? Is the expectation that you are still logging on at 9 a.m. and you are punching out at 5 o'clock? How does that change the expectation? And finding ways to create that and adapt that, but also make it flexible enough that You can adapt to people's lifestyles and you can adapt to their changes, because if people don't have, a great example of this is childcare. So somebody with children at home is going to have different requirements and needs for a home workspace than somebody with or without kids. It's going to be a different conversation. And so logging on at 9 a.m. may not be possible with children because you have other things that have to be taken care of. Maybe you're still homeschooling them if schools haven't reopened or if schools are forced to close again, whatever it may be. So how are you going to manage your employees in those environments before you even talk about getting them back into the office? Because once you get them back into the office, then you can start to look at, well, the old rules still apply, but here's all these new rules about keeping your distances. I remember, when we were preparing for this, one of the things Michael kept hitting on was, the idea of give everybody their own thing, give them their own dongles, give them their own pens, give them their own markers, give them their own keyboards. Just everybody has their own. And it's one of those simplistic things that's a low dollar cost for a business to ensure safety. But little things like that really can be helpful.
Absolutely. I also think that communication and training are going to become really important, right? Because once new policies have been created, companies and organizations are going to need to figure out a way to message and get the information out to their people in a way that's easy and simple to digest and retain. I mean, we are all creatures of habit, and I think that tape on the floor will only go so far. And as the number of new rules stack up and the amount of change increases in a company, people are going to need a way to understand what these new rules are, and they're going to need a simple way to understand them. And I think that you're going to all of a sudden start to see a greater focus with digital marketing and communication, i.e. digital signage. And I also think that training is going to be paramount to this. And training, let's face it, we're not going to pack people into divisible rooms sitting elbow to elbow like we did in the past, right? And so now you're going to have figure out a way to train everybody in the company. And then you're probably going to need to make that information available so they can go back and watch it again. And in the old days, people would say, "Oh, we're going to have an 8-hour training session or a 4-hour training session.
Not going to happen.
You got to use an application." That's going to be really difficult. I think we might have to look at this as short, a few minute video that's only a few minutes a piece on each specific topic, and then make it available for people to pull down and rewatch. And then you're going to need a way to ensure that people have watched it and people understand it. And so, I think there are some additional dynamics. And again, I'll take the opportunity to say everybody's very focused on how do we make the low touch conference room. But when I look at the entire building and I look at the impact of some of the changes, I think about the fact that we need to inform people and we need to modify our workflow and go about how we communicate the information in a slightly different manner.
Absolutely. And what a great transition. So let's say that the business owners and the teams in charge figured out the policies to the extent that they can. And now we got some of our employees back to work. How does it look? What does it look like? What do employees need to have to successfully manage that transition? I mean, normally you sign your contract, you get your handbook, you have a brief training, and then maybe periodically you get put in a room with your colleagues and you get trained on something, new policy, new rule. How does it happen? Who manages that?
Well, and in the old days, you also had a desk.
Oh,
and by the old days, I mean 3 months ago, even if the company went through a densification program, right? And you went to an open or activities-based or agile, workplace, choose the word you'd like. You had a place, right? And you came in and you sat down with your computer and you did your work, even if you had to reserve the space. So let's go to the extreme. Let's say that's your environment. When the company says, "Okay, we're open for business and you can come back on June 15th. What does that look like when I show up as an employee? If I'm management and I have 6 floors of open seating that can be reserved, and I know that I'm putting caps on the number of people that can come in, how do I most efficiently let people know where they should go and what space they can choose from? And how do I make sure that as I'm letting people in the building, that the people that go to the first floor don't all don't all focus and gather in one particular area? I mean, I will just tell you as a personal story, I went to a very large store over the weekend, kind of like a supermarket kind of a store, and they're limiting the number of people that could get in. Makes total sense,
That's right.
right? Great. We got in, went through the door. There was nobody in the front of the room, in the front of the store. Everybody was gathered near the back in the left-hand corner of the store, and people were elbow to elbow. So that's not a great situation either. We could certainly, they're limiting the number of people that are in, but they had no way to manage or limit the traffic flow within. So think about a building for a second. I think it's going to be important. People are going to need to understand, when I show up, how do I know where I go? How do I know where I can and where I can't go? How do I know what areas are clean? How do I know what areas are not clean? How do I know how many people can sit in a conference room? Right? Because all I know is in the past, we were building, a host of 10 by 10 rooms that had 4 seats in them. Well, if you want to social distance, you're not putting 4 people in a 10 by 10 room sitting elbow to elbow. So, so I think you have to, the first thing is look at the policies. Then you have to start to build a framework for the communication and most likely the technology behind it that will allow people to most quickly understand where, how, why, and what, right? And remember, we're all creatures of habit. So repetition is going to be important. How many people are going to remember to not step over the tape once they get in the building?
Absolutely.
And one last thing that came to mind, for anybody that works in a downtown area or a major metropolitan, how about elevators? Think about this for a second. So I've spent a lot of time in my life in New York City, and buildings are crowded and elevators are packed. So now, if I'm an employee and my company has those 6 floors and I don't know where there's availability, in the old days, I would take the elevator and I'd get on the first elevator and I'd get off at the floor and I'd walk around, which is a big time sink in and of itself. Now, if I have to wait 15 minutes or 20 minutes to get into an elevator because only 8 people can go in the elevator, what's that look like and how much lost productivity is there? So I think that where the technology starts to fold in is people are going to say, gee, we need a way to understand what's happening in these environments in real time and make that data available to our people so they can be most effective. Right? So it's like, this is like the sweater, and you pull on the thread and it just starts to ravel out. But
and let me just chime in here. When we were preparing for this and I was reading a little bit more, every time I open a new article, something else jumps out at me. And like you, I've been to many big corporations in New York City or Boston or any other major cities where there are floors and floors of employees, but there is a cafeteria, there is a gym, there are water fountains every so many feet on a corridor, there is a pantry where you can come in as you please and grab. What happens to that? This could prove to be overwhelming because no one is going to figure this out overnight.
Well, yeah. So let me, I know technology is later, but let me just drop a couple of things related to technology. When you started, you said we're in uncharted waters, and that's true. And a lot of the solutions that we'll talk about are things that you could be doing today. The difference is you don't have to, or the reasons why you're doing them are maybe a little bit different than why you would roll them out in a post-COVID world. But when I think about digital signage, I start to think that digital signage becomes more and more important because that's my link. That's the link to the employees. And with things like sensors, I can give people real-time information about where they can and where they cannot go. So that's kind of important. Another thing, and you need to think about, when you think about digital signage, think about your whole building. Don't just think about, hey, I was in the elevator and there's a small LCD screen there and it's telling me the news. Think about how it will help your people to truly navigate the space and make the most out of their day. The other piece to this is that if I'm using sensors and I'm able to capture information in real time about where people are and how many people, now I can start to enforce the rules. But If I'm worried about what my office looks like, I mean, look, day one, when 25% people can come in or 50% people, I'm just worried about how do I open up shop, right? Because I've never done this before, and I say me, I'm talking as if I'm a business, a large organization. I might not want to just rush and start to rebuild out my floor or repurpose my floor. So what I really want to do is develop the policies, get them out to the people, to the team, and then be able to do some benchmarking, right? So if I'm using technology to capture information about capacity and utilization, now I can start to see the policies that I put in place, how do they align with what's really happening, right? And what's happening to the level of business. And I can capture that information so that when I get to day two, and I can make data-driven decisions about, you know what, maybe we really don't want people to sit in those cubes because they could be just as efficient and effective working remotely since we've rolled video out everywhere. And maybe I want to repurpose those cubes and turn them into meeting spaces. At least I can have some data to understand, is that a wise decision or not a wise decision? Because right now, everything is best guess and theoretical. So whatever I were to do at the beginning, once I laid out my policies, I would try and set myself up to capture information and do some benchmarking to understand the impact on my business, and am I heading in the right direction? And then once I've captured that information and I've analyzed it, I can then actually make some next layer decisions.
I completely agree. Josh, over to you, because that touches a little bit policy, and maybe not a little bit, maybe a lot. So to Michael's point, companies are developing this day one, day two, day three strategy to ensure their business continuity. Every business is individual, but I'm assuming someone makes the decision who comes back and who doesn't. And how does that affect everything?
Of course. And so there's a couple of things, there's a lot to unpack in all of this.
Exactly.
One of the things that you have to think about is understanding what the circumstances of each of your employees are. So do your employees have home internet? Are they currently sitting in a parking lot working because that's the parking lot of a library working because that's the only place where they have free Wi-Fi that allows them to function? You know, a lot of people, I mean, I'll speak to the Bay Area, like we gloss over the idea. It's like, oh, everybody's got, you know, an internet connection at home. No, they really don't. And we don't have the proper data anywhere. The FCC doesn't have it. Nobody's really got it as to how many people are actually connected and where those connections exist because of how that data has been measured traditionally. So without that data, we need to take, the business owners need to take stock of their employees and see who's connected at home and see who's not. Because if people can work from home, versus not being able to work from home, the people that should be invited back fastest would be the people that might not have another option. Additionally, you also have the high risk candidates that you have to factor in. So what do you do with an employee who's a high risk candidate? You know, what does
that mean?
The underlying health conditions. So are they at risk? So if there was another exposure in the office, are they more susceptible to a harsher reaction? I know you read a lot of articles about this, and it's like some people may have mild symptoms, but if you have the underlying health conditions that the CDC has warned about, you could be putting people's lives at risk. So how do you manage that circumstance? And setting up policies that might favor them and say, well, you know, you're an at-risk person because you have diabetes, as I think I'm going to use as one of the examples. So we're concerned about, you know, bringing you back into the office under these circumstances. So how are you engaging with each of these employees? But in addition to that, how do you know? Because then in order to find out if an employee is high risk, they have to be willing to give up health and personal health information to their employer to say, I don't want to come in because it's a risk for me. And so how do you manage that privacy? How do you manage that circumstance? Because you don't want your employees coming in and putting themselves at risk. And so you start to look at how do you engage these people in a way that they can still function. They're not being discriminated against simply because they don't want to put themselves at risk. And at the same time, they need to make sure that they actually have the access to do the things that they need to do. And so finding ways to support the employees through this process becomes your number one priority, because your business isn't going to function if your employees can't work from home because they don't have access. It's not going to function if you're trying to bring them in, and bringing them in might put their lives at risk. And so they're going to start looking for other opportunities, or they're going to try and find ways out of it, or they're just going to leave. They're going to quit because they don't have an option. And so you start to look at all these ways that this plays into itself, and what employers need to look at in regards to that. Additionally, once you get them into the office, let's go to Michael's point about, okay, well, let's have digital signage, and we need to know where we're going. And these are things that we should have. I know that, there are apps out there where you can you can look something up on a retailer's app. It'll tell you what store has it in stock. You'll go to that store. It will tell you what shelf it's on, and then we'll give you turn-by-turn instructions on how to get there. Is that what we need to do to enter an office space? Okay, well, if that's what we need to do.
Really an interesting point.
And so if that's what we need to do in order to make sure that we have a continuous flow as to this is the direction you go. Do you only travel one way around a building? Do certain elevators only go up? Do certain elevators only go down with people inside them? How are you managing that flow so you're not getting a lot of cross action? And at the same time, once you have that and you start implementing this, what are you doing with all of that data? Because now you're asking people to take their personal devices and give you a lot of information about themselves. And do you have a way to manage that data? Are you ensuring you're partnering with people who are treating that data ethically and responsibly? And these things just start snowballing, and you start looking at more and more partnerships and more conversations that need to take place. And we're rushing to get back, but there's a lot of questions that still have to be asked that maybe haven't been asked yet. So what are your data management policies now that you're going to track your employees? What are our policies around making sure that our employees are safe? And if they have an underlying health condition, how do they report that? Who do they report that to? And how do we keep that information secure? Yeah. So these are just a few things that, like, in terms of the way that policies come up in their engagement with the people, that really should be considered as to who's coming back first, if they're coming back first, or how do we support them not coming back for a while?
Well, and I think the intersection with AV is that, for our industry, the people we talk to, it's going to broaden, right? Because now we have an opportunity to go talk to a new audience. And I believe that the HR department and the legal department are going to sort out the policies and those issues. But then the HR department's going to need someone to help deploy and work up solutions. And I think that's going to be a triumvirate between real estate, IT, and AV working together, in this case, to solve HR problems, right? In the past, it's often looked at about how do we get a product to market faster? How do we sell more of something, right? And we're, with our collaboration rooms, where we're solving, sales team or revenue producing type problems or engineering team type problems. Now, I think we're going to spend more time solving HR problems, right? So the other piece that I then have to ask myself is, within a given company, what's the culture of the organization?
Excellent.
Because look, I come out of the AV world. So to me, it was very easy for us to virtualize our company. And when I talk to other people, it's no big deal. Oh yeah, you spun up Zoom or Teams or whichever platform you're using. Yeah, you did it in 3 days. That's great. And I talked to a friend of mine who spun up hundreds of thousands of seats of a collaboration platform in like 3 days. Unheard of. And a huge, huge win, right, for the IT side. But then I asked myself, all of these people that work for the company that have never had to rely on video because their whole experience has been based on, I come into the office and I sit down and I talk to people around me, or I pick up the telephone. Now they have to rely on video. They have to use these solutions that have been rolled out remotely over the last 3 days. Where do they begin? Right. And so, I would ask myself, is the particular organization or company, are they a video first organization, or do their people not know what BYOD means? And don't laugh, because I was in a room where some folks in the medical community were on a call, and these were technical people and very high profile docs. And I heard one of them say, well, I don't understand, what is BYOD? I laughed, but I take it for granted. But remember, the people touching the products and solutions that our industry are bringing forward now are a lot wider, right? So we have to understand what's the impact to them. And I guess when I think about it, I now put it in 3 buckets. How did people work pre-COVID, right before March? How do they work now?
Yeah.
And then the $1 million question is, how will they work? Right? Because if they've adapted to the technology and you bring them back in the office, they're not going to roll it back. They're not going to stop using video. I mean, technology, the reason why you buy technology, if you do it the right way, it's a productivity multiplier, right? And so, one of the things you try to do is a business, and if I put my business owner hat on, I say to myself, okay, well, we weren't out for 3 or 4 months making business. So how do I accelerate the pace back in? A building's a slice of it. I need to make sure that whatever I do, we're making forward progress. And if I make the wrong assumptions, or if I don't think through the capabilities of our team, and I don't think about how I get people trained, and I just open up the office, but I have different operating parameters, I might actually do things that are detrimental to the business and go backwards. So I think all of these things are really threaded together quite closely. I also believe that the building is a strategic advantage, and there's a need for the building. So I don't think it's so simple that we can just say, we'll never go back to the building, right? That's not going to happen. So the question is, what will it start to look like? And what gaps have been created, and how can we use technology to fill those gaps? Now thinking about the fact that we're doing more than building rooms, right? We're now developing training solutions. Sorry, go ahead, Josh.
Well, no, and that's where you were going is exactly the point of what this creates effectively is a new position within every major organization where somebody takes over one of these 6-person meeting rooms or 4-person meeting rooms, and that becomes their office. And their entire job is just conducting trainings. It is, how do we, how do I operate a room under these new conditions? What are the new parameters? And you take that AV person, or you take some person with a training or instruction background, and you teach them how to use these rooms. And then they sit there and they conduct live in-person trainings with people. You can record the sessions for future viewings.
They can write tutorials.
Yeah, and you just have all of these. You have to start building a library of, here's how you work from home. This is these are the tools that you use to work from home. Here's how you access shared drives. Here's how you get onto the VPN. Here's why you don't stay on a VPN all day long. You get in and you get out, and we have to provide an education in the things that we have built to these people so they better understand how to work in this new environment. Because how many times when VPNs started becoming a normal thing did you just log on and forget to log off for the day? But a VPN has so many finite connections per company. So if it's a big enough company, you could be making it so other people can't get on and access the files that they need. And having that trainer there, and having them with a physical space where it's something familiar, and it's like, oh, well, here's the office. Here's what it looks like now. Hey, look at these new things we're implementing for you. Yeah, we know you're not here yet, but you will be, and we're looking forward to having you back. And you can create messaging to build on that culture for the people and keep them in that connected way. And it facilitates that ability of making sure that they understand what they've done relating to what they're doing now, and helping them figure out what that means going forward. Because your people are your greatest resource, and you want to make sure that they're doing what they need to do, and they're supported in the way that they need to be supported. And having that new position of somebody to train, and somebody to educate, and somebody to just work with this technology in a dedicated space where it makes so much sense for a business provider to make sure that resource is there. Because then it's not trying to you're not filing a ticket with IT. You have these library of resources, written, video, live, whatever is necessary. and they're there to work with them.
So you said a person. I'm thinking the businesses need to start thinking, I need a department dedicated to this transition and how do we work in the new environment. And I'm going to read something here because I don't want to misquote it. Data, and I think the data was published by Forrester, shows that productivity improves by 20 to 25% in organization with connected employees. Mm-hmm. So that automatically brings a point. Both of you are seasoned technologists. You've worked mm-hmm. with the buildings, in the buildings, you design buildings. Mm-hmm. What do business owners need to think about as they try to put together essential technology kits for post-COVID-19?
So two things. Let me make one quick comment, and that is that just to close out something Josh was saying and what you led into. So large organizations have corporate communications, and corporate communications departments are take on more of a broadcast production type feel. They're creating the messaging, they're pushing the messaging out. I wouldn't be shocked if the AV person that used to work for real estate that's been moved over to the IT department now gets redeployed into the corporate communications department. And I wouldn't be wholly shocked if all of a sudden they were a studio that were set up for people to deliver training. And because we're trying to rebuild the engine of the plane while we're flying, right? Because your business is running. It's not like no one has the luxury to say, I'm going to start a new business tomorrow and here's the long ramp up we have. I think that the training is going to have to get delivered in these small chunks, 5, 10, 15-minute podcasts, webcasts. I think you're going to start to see podcast and webcast studios become more and more popular. And I think you're going to start to see these distance learning type studios become more popular. And it's interesting. I don't know that it was because of COVID, because some of it started happening beforehand, but that's been a big area for us in our design business is, building out spaces to deliver distance learning without having a large room full of people locally at the origination point. That being said, I think, if tomorrow we're going to walk through the building with a client or an architect and talk about what are the things we need to quickly think about and build you a list and so that we can start to formulate what a kit looks like. Obviously, we've talked about digital signage, so I'm not going to harp too much there, other than to say I would want displays that would be able to provide everything from the news to internal traffic flow, where people should go, when, and how. When I get to rooms, meeting rooms, conference rooms, I am going to want a scheduling panel. I don't know that I'm going to want to touch the scheduling panel to reserve the room. I'm probably going to do that through my mobile device, but I want some kind of digital sign outside the door that says it's available, it's not available because it's reserved, or it's being cleaned. Then, as I start to think about what happens in that room from a strategy standpoint, I think that people are always going to be, more and more people are going to be working remote. And even when we have people in the room, we're going to more likely than not be bringing people in that are remote. And so I think people need to start imagining video in every room, collaboration video in every room. And then from there, I would say to myself, where am I on the technology scale, right? Am I highly evolved? Do I have dedicated integrated systems, or am I at the beginning? And how do people in my organization relate to technology? And so I might start with the following. We just rolled video out. People have been using it for the past 3 months. They all know how to use their computer. So Josh, you brought it up earlier. I have this view that BYOD is going to be incredibly important because I don't need to teach people how to use their computer. And if I look at a room, the starting point on a room might be, hey, think of the room and the peripherals in the room as peripherals to your computer, and keep it very low touch. And so the easiest, lowest hanging fruit is I come into the room with my laptop or my mobile device and I make a wireless connection back to a display that's not touch enabled, right? And then from there, if I have the capability and the budget, I make it so I can wirelessly run a Teams or a Zoom call with my laptop using all the peripherals in the room, so it's scaled up. And if I don't have the budget for that, or the infrastructure is not in place, then I look to what's real basic. I'm going to issue everybody their own USB cable, whatever type, and their own video cable, whatever type. And why am I going to do that? If I can personalize as much of the equipment as possible, I don't have to, it's easier to clean the room. Because in between sessions, when you have different people in the room, you're going to have a cleaning crew. And you want the cleaning crew to be able to get in and get out really quickly. Now, does that mean you can't clean and disinfect a touchscreen? No. But if you were to say to me, how do I minimize risk? Well, the lowest hanging fruit to minimize risk is personalize everything, right? So that's the kind of direction I would go, and I'd start building kits like that to assess my entire organization.
Agreed. My head is spinning, and the thought that comes popping up is we could create a series just talking about how do we go back to work, because I'm almost sure that every week we either learn something new, or there will be new rule or new direction from the state or local government that will have to be considered when making those decisions. Kind of crazy.
So here are a couple of important things along those, just what everybody's, I think, kind of wanting to hear. Can you touch things? Yes. If you want to minimize risk, because that's all that we can really do. None of us are infectious disease doctors, but if we want to minimize risk, the obvious thing is let's reduce the touch. The simple rooms are easy. We walk in, we do BYOD. As the rooms get more complex and more involved, you can still think about solutions that enable BYOD. I don't need to touch the touch panel in the room. I can use a virtual touch panel on a web page, on my laptop, or on my mobile device.
Yep.
Right? If I need to annotate and whiteboard in real time, most laptops nowadays are touchscreens.
That's right.
I can sit in the room, I can make my wireless connection that we've already spoken about, and I can use my touchscreen. If I need a way to turn the system on, people are talking about things like sensors and voice activated. I think aux sensors are a great way to trigger a system and have it turn on. I'm not as high on voice-driven systems because they're challenged with background noise, they're challenged with accents, and most importantly, people that are not technologists don't know what to say to the system. So I have to teach you more.
That's right.
Right? You know, QR codes and RFID badges, that's also relatively low-hanging fruit. It allows me to tell the room who I am. And if the room's intelligent and the back-end systems are intelligent, it could read my meeting invite, it could pull up whatever resources that I need, and it can minimize the way in which I touch things. So those are just a couple of suggestions to put on the table.
Yeah, the only other one that I would stick on top of that is looking at management resources. You know, you need a central repository that's accessible to the cleaning crew, to the support staff. And they need to know what rooms are occupied, how stacked are the meetings, have they put rules in place to make sure that you can't book meetings back to back unless you are the same person in that room. So effectively almost camping in a room for an afternoon. And then how is the automated process going in terms of this room needs to be cleaned? I mean, almost think of it in terms of a hospital at that point. This room is occupied, this patient has left, this room needs to be cleaned, and providing that resource to all the relevant parties. So that way room status is available on a constant basis. And that way you're able to utilize those common spaces. And then you talked about some of the communal areas. I mean, the communal areas are starting to shut down. Google's made a lot of announcements about the things that they're not, you know, their sleep pods, I think, was my favorite one, that they were like, yeah, they're going to be suspended for a while. But looking at those communal areas and how do you use those communal areas in an effective way? Do those become spaces where people can gather and have impromptu meetings? And does that mean you bring in a display on a rolling cart and set something up for people to be able to meet there, because you can spread them out wider?
That is really interesting.
You also look at outdoor spaces for the same thing. Like, are there ways to utilize some of these spaces that weren't originally for gathering places? They served other purposes that can now function as those meeting rooms. And then looking at the cascade effect of that decision, does that mean that we need to ramp up sound masking? Because we're going to be generating more noise in these common areas. We There's HVAC considerations, considering the filters that we're going to have to start changing to potentially ensure that the air is being cleaned, and those kinds of things that we need to look at. So, in terms of the designing of the meeting rooms, it isn't just necessarily what meeting rooms already exist, but it's what can I turn into a meeting room that previously served a different function.
That's right. That's right. And people don't want to sit in the cubes or in that communal table. That now becomes a way to repurpose space without taking on more cost and added real estate, and turn them into flexible meeting spaces that can be used. And instead of me sitting or you sitting at a cube, we're going to work remotely, and we're going to come into the office when we need to meet with people, and then we're going to leave.
We have very little time left. This is most insightful, and I think we've talked about a lot of different things, and more we talk, more questions I actually have. Because one of you just said, well, cleaning crew, typically cleaning crew in a building, it's not the most sophisticated, technology forward group of people. And now they are becoming the most essential people in your organization, who not only touch the most expensive investment that your firm just have done, but they need to know how to do it. They need to do it quick, effectively, and then they need to communicate to the rest of the organization that it has been done. That's right. A challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not just cleaning, they're disinfecting, which means sometimes product needs to sit on top of the surface that you're disinfecting for longer than 5 seconds.
That's right. So who teaches them? Yes, it is so much to think about. Guys, I wanted to thank you for, first of all, dedicating an hour to sit and chat with me about this. This was most insightful. Common sense should prevail. Grounding decision-making in practical, sound judgment should be the motto moving forward. But who knows? Like I said at the onset, this is uncharted territory.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. It's been a lot of fun.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Michael, and thank you very much, Josh. We hope you enjoyed the rest of the show. Bye, guys. Thanks.
Bye.